I know that you're very active in trying to draw attention to BMX now and trying to get more participation in it, which I think is another massive task and a very honourable one, by the way, that you do. And of course, there's so many distractions now that we didn't have as kids, right? BMX was one of a few things we could do. Now there's very many things kids can do, and so that's a tough deal. But getting kids to ride bikes, I guess I stand there as testament to, if you start riding a bike when you're 8 years old or whatever it was. I had a bike before that. Then you're probably still going to be riding it, 40 years later. So, and it's a pretty cool thing, because that's the case for a lot of people, I think, that were into BMX in those early years.
BMX Breakthrough is bridging the gap from old school to new school, from tracks to manufacturers, from new riders to their local tracks, and it doesn't stop at racing, but the mission is to connect people with bikes. Join me, Jay Oaks, as I interview key people in the sport and in the industry that are involved in their local circles, in their communities, at their local tracks, and aiming to make a difference on a local level. You'll hear stories, marketing tips, failures, successes, and a way to make a difference in your local BMX community. Let's dive in as we kick off this next episode. Well, Dom, you have come highly recommended from Bob, whose episode aired last week, and got to talk to him, and he spoke so highly of you and had so many great things to say and told us a little bit about what you're doing. But will you start with a quick introduction of who are you, Dom Phipps?
That's a big question. Well, yeah, I'm just somebody actually that really has a personal connection to BMX from when I was a kid. I didn't really do anything notable when I was a kid on a BMX. I wasn't kind of a known rider or, in magazines or anything. It was really kind of a coming of age thing in some way for me, because BMX was, sort of first step outside of, being a kid and having some of the tools and the independence that sort of lead you into being an adult. So yeah, I kind of emerged, I guess, on the scene a number of years ago. I was just interested in the history of BMX. I've been collecting BMX bikes for a while as a kind of hobby, and was just curious to keep looking back down that road, and trying to sort of understand initially, why was I so sort of interested in coming back to this and being so sort of passionate about bikes, because certainly I was pretty committed to the stuff I was doing, and that led me in a direction of eventually not needing to kind of fill my house up with old bikes, but just being more interested in the history of things. Initially, that was the history of the Haro brand, because that was a brand I was very interested in, very much, kind of interested in as a kid. And that was one of the catalysts that brought me to the States, getting to know Bob Haro, and him sort of helping me, opening the door to kind of get me to come over. So who am I is a good question. I'm really just somebody with, I guess, some skills that enable me to do this type of work. I came from the background of being a pretty good researcher, fairly decent writer, and learned a lot on the way, how to sort of get better at everything I do. So yeah, just I see myself in this kind of like little bit of a separate groove in the community, in the scene, and I love very much what I do. I'm very lucky to be able to do it still. I've often thought that doing a BMX project would be a one-off, and then I'd have to go and get a real job and kind of grow up again. But honestly, I've just managed to stay in there, and I think a lot of it's just my passion for it and my commitment to it, and really just wanting to do this piece of it. I'm not a writer still or anything like that particularly. I just have this, I don't know, just have this curiosity still, I guess, to want to authentically record the story and get it on the record, so people can enjoy it. So, yeah.
I like that. I think it is interesting because Bob when he had mentioned you, and he said that you and I were similar, and in what we were doing. And it is fascinating having the conversation with you because our similarity is in that we aren't, aside from just people who enjoy the sport, it's not like we had a name, we didn't have a big title. We're just people who are really passionate about BMX. And I think that makes it really fun too, is because neither one of us had a large jumping off platform in order to
Yeah.
propel what it is that we want to help create and the stories that we want to tell and so on and so forth. But it's just really that passion and that desire and you becoming can building relationship with different people throughout the industry. And anyway, it makes it fun because when you and I first talked and chatted briefly, you said, well, I'm not really somebody in the sport. I don't really have much of a name. Uh, and I think in some ways it almost makes it more fun of just being able to you build those connections and see the sport or see the history retold in your case of things that are progressing as a result of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of singular kind of focus to do it. And for me in the beginning, I didn't really have too many sort of issues getting people to take my work seriously from the point of view, I didn't really have to sort of sell myself too hard to get people to want to contribute. I think some of that is down to the fact that BMX doesn't really have a ton of this type of work in its community. Well, there certainly wasn't any other books around. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. I've never been insecure at all about that, and I'm the first person to admit, to say to everybody, if someone looks at me sideways at an event and says, "Did we meet back in the day?" I'm like, probably not. Especially kind of where I live. But so yeah, I enjoy that. I really enjoy the role. Actually, I think it allows me to be really focused on what I do. I don't have to sort of live up to anything that that isn't true. It's just I like doing the work. I've got a skill set that I probably gathered together in a previous career, previous life, and the two things kind of collide in a space. And I've stayed in that space for quite a long time because I just love doing the work, and I love a lot of people too. And Bob Osborne is a great example of that. I can still remember actually the first time I contacted him. I had a bunch of I had this idea for this book that was going to be much more generic than the stuff I'd done before. So it wasn't brand based. It was kind of, okay, let's try and tell this whole story, or at least try and tell some origin stories instead of trying to make it too comprehensive. And I had this list of people that I knew from other projects, a bunch of great people, writers, people like Ron Wilkerson, Blyther, Bob Harrow, obviously, Eddie Fiola, Mike Dominguez, guys who I'd gone to know well and sort of built this trust with. And then there was this other group of people that I'd never kind of crossed paths with. And I was like, okay, well, these people have to be in this book. So I started thinking about how I was gonna do that. And when it sort of boils down, what it ends up being is like a cold call, right? You just call somebody up. You first of all try to get their number, or if you can get an intro from somebody. But in the case of Bob Osborne, it was definitely a cold call. So I found his gallery. I picked up the phone. He answered, and I was surprised. I'm like, oh, wonder if he's even the guy that answers the phone there. But he did, and he listened patiently for a few minutes while I kind of rambled on about, my kind of soft pitch for this book I was doing. And at the end of, when I sort of drew breath at the end of it and stopped, he said, so you're English? And I said, yeah, I am. And then we had a 10-minute chat about England because he loves England. He visits yearly, and he knows probably more about certain parts of England than me, actually. And then at the very end of the conversation, he said, okay, back to the book. He said something like, so are you going to get this thing done? Are you going to finish it? And I said, yeah, absolutely I am. And he said, because I get maybe 4 or 5 people a year that will come to me with an idea like this, and I'll give up some time or whatever, and rather disappointingly, they rarely come to anything. So I said, well, look, I can give you my word that we will get this done. and that was the beginning of a period of really getting to know him and traveling to Livingston where he lives, and basking in his generosity, not just in his generosity with his time and trusting me to tell his story, but also the generosity of letting me stay at his house and just giving me a lot of time when I was there. So he's a truly remarkable guy. I have nothing but huge respect for Bob. I feel in some ways, what I've heard from other people over the years when they talked about the experience they have working for Wizard back in the day was that they were kind of touched by him. He had this kind of ability to bring the best out of people. He was a great leader in that he was committed to doing everything as well, if not better, than everybody around him. He never took his foot off the gas and said, okay, well, you guys take this on. This is how good it needs to be. He was always the guy that everyone looked at and said, this better be good enough for Bob. So, he was very much that guy. He was a mentor to people. I think Wendy Osborne, his daughter, says in the book, and I'm paraphrasing here because I'm not reading it, but it's something along the lines of, my dad was always or constantly striving to do creative things as well as he could, or cheerleading for other people who were doing the same, right? So he was that guy who was just energizing everybody. And that's why he's so pivotal to this story. And that's why I've just introduced this new chapter in the book, which is a dedicated chapter about him sort of becoming an entrepreneur and going through the process of starting the business. So yeah, Bob is, I don't even know how to describe him, but he is a remarkable guy. Yeah.
Quick detour to one of our gold level sponsors, Luminex Neon, who has partnered with us to help accomplish the mission here at BMX Breakthrough. We're so grateful for their opportunity, and there's a special place, a near and dear place in my heart for neon, all things neon, whether that's on paper, whether it's shoes, whether it is a sign in a living room or a garage space, it doesn't matter. I love neon, always have, probably always will, and so neon signs create a unique statement piece. So if you're looking for that for your bike shop, for your garage, for your workspace, maybe it's for your living room, Luminex Neon offers exactly what you need. So with unparalleled craftsmanship and endless design possibilities, Luminex Neon is your go-to for brightening up any space. You can follow the link in the description and use our promo code BMX Breakthrough 10 in order to get 10% off of your order and to explore everything that Luminex Neon has to offer. That story speaks to, for me personally, the response that I got from him, because when I reached out to him via email and said, hey, I've been thinking about you a lot. This is the project. This is where the direction that it's headed in. I would love to interview you for a podcast. And his response back was, we talked about this. It's so cool when people do what they say they're going to do. I would love to be a part of it. And and so obviously your story, you got that firsthand experience. I didn't necessarily go to him looking for his immediate involvement. And so it was a different conversation. We sat and we had a length of conversation, but it wasn't that same way. But I'm sure that when I left that room, there was probably the expectation of, well, we'll see if this goes anywhere. And because that's been his experience. So it paints, sheds light on why it is that he responded that way to you. And then the response that I got as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's who he is at his core, I think, is a guy who, even, now he's older, he's still deeply committed to his art, his photography. I sometimes wonder with him whether, sometimes because of the subject matter that he's photographing now, that I believe the challenge of getting in front of the subject is often as sort of gratifying for him as actually taking the photographs. So I think, that sort of speaks to who he is. He's a guy who comes up with an idea and delivers. And yeah, I guess that is what poses that question in his mind. Yeah, is this guy going to waste my time, or is this, because if he's not, then I'm in, and I'm going to make this happen. So yeah.
Yeah, because he's I think he's very relational, and he's a connector of people, and he's a storyteller through his
Yeah.
photos, and he speaks to seeing life through a lens and seeing, oh, what this photo will look like, and this is the picture that we want to paint, and then the number of people that he has impacted by just who he is, just genuinely who he is, and
Mm.
being that personality and that that character that reaches out to people and truly cares for people too is what has impacted the trickle down. Just after listening to the episode with him, one of my friends reached out to me and goes, I wonder if he knew what he was doing in the moment. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, the impact that he was making on people. Or do you think it was just unintentional? And I said, I think that's just who he is. I think he just makes an impact on people because he legitimately cares, and because he really wants to know about who you are, and he really wants to know about what you're working on and how you're writing, or his current photography subject matter of working with humans that have stories to tell. And when he talks through those stories, the way that he's so articulate about the details and the 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 reason that they got to where they are and what created them to be who they are is just next level amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. The standards are high, and I think you're absolutely right. I don't think Bob is contrived in any way. I think when he was young, he was learning. He enjoyed being, the person that could help other people. The book is deep with those stories. There's a new chapter in the book that is dedicated to Bob, really to Bob starting that magazine, where he came from, even when he was a young kid and getting his first camera, and fast forward to being a fireman and starting the business, and the challenges he had bootstrapping it. It's pretty inspirational stuff. And yeah, I think he just has that nature to him, which is he's not a transactional person. He's not trying to get you to do the same for him. He's just like, and that's a really welcoming thing, I think, in life these days, because we're all guilty of being a bit transactional, I guess, from time to time. But he's just in his kind of support of me. I've never felt that. It's just always been, you know, to try and help me to get this done, because he believes in it, and he believes in me to do it. So yeah, it's totally it's been a totally cool experience for me. So
That's neat. Well, okay, so we have a few things to talk about, because one of the big things that Bob focused on when I talked to him was your book, The Birth of the Freestyle Movement. You've created this book, which I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the release that you're doing in October. But before we dive into that, I would love to know, like, where was it along the way that did you stumble into a BMX action magazine, or was it the freestyling magazine, or what was it that
it
that
kind of got me into it. Yeah,
grabbed your
I mean,
attention?
yeah, that's a good question actually. It was none of those things. It was, as far as I can remember, I was 8 years old, and my mum was bringing my brother and I up on her own. My dad had taken off, and we were, sort of challenged for money, because my mum was pretty much a mom before my dad left, and she didn't really have a career or anything. So we were kind of flatlining there for a while. And my brother is a little bit older than me. He's a little bit more easygoing and less needy. I was definitely the needy kid. I was like, I want to be out there doing stuff, right? So um, I assume I probably, bugged my mum a lot to get me a BMX. And I do remember going to get it. And I can still remember that kind of like tangible smell of the bike shop and the kind of rubber in the tires, and, just being really kind of inspired. If, I'm not even sure as a kid I could even knew what being inspired was, but it kind of feels like that's what it was to me now. Was, that was this became this beacon for me. And yeah, just kind of riding, and at some point, I guess, just a very innocent lifestyle where they're just riding my bike around the neighborhood and probably bumping into other kids doing it too. But um, and then, getting a bit older and meeting older kids and taking it a bit more seriously and having, a bit of a lifestyle around it. And again, just kind of embracing it. And definitely, for me, the magazines that were, sort of regularly influential were, we had a magazine called BMX Action Bike in England. That might have been the first magazine I ever saw. I definitely did see freestyling and BMX action too, but they weren't quite as available to us as kids. But and of course, I think BMX Action by magazine was very much inspired anyway by what was happening in the States, as was the whole scene in England. And as the scene matured and took more inspiration from what was happening in California, we got a version of that. And I think what happens in England is that with everything, whether it's anything artistic, whether it's music or fashion or BMX in this case, we usually don't have enough of any one thing to be able to indulge it 100%. So you're sort of like, well, I'm into music and I'm into BMX, I'm into skateboarding, whatever it is. So BMX was very much the sort of like central thing for me. I loved it. Didn't do anything particularly remarkable, hung out with local friends, rode local bad ramps, roamed a lot. We would ride a lot. It's funny, I was thinking the other day, I think we'd ride like 15, 20 miles, right? Which seems like a lot as a kid. So it was just that lifestyle. Yeah, that's what I remember being the sort of earliest point of it for me, was just getting a bike, being totally and utterly psyched on it, and then being on it constantly, and then bumping into the magazines and having a bit more of a sort of mature crowd of friends, I guess, as we got a bit older. So yeah.
That's cool. It's funny that you say that, as riding, 15, 20 miles. And it Mike Miranda, when I interviewed him, he had something similar, was just talking about the distances that he had ridden. And like when his dad left him at the BMX track and he had to ride home. And I think he said it was like 8 miles or something. But when you're riding around with your friends, because I used to do something very similar. I had 2 good friends, and every day after school, we'd go riding around. And it's funny because it's quite a distance on a BMX bike. But as a kid, it can feel like a long way, but it doesn't feel like you're taking a long time. And
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a long distance, but it doesn't feel like it's like grueling. It's fun. It's free.
Yeah.
It's enjoyable.
Yeah, you can easily kind of get lost in all that, kind of, which is the magical part of it, is just kind of like being so stoked on it that it doesn't matter what it's just, I think you don't have a lot on offer to you as a kid. Obviously, that's a little bit different in modern life, but BMX, I think, was so important to a lot of kids because it was one of the few choices that we had. But it was a super cool choice. It was a super fun thing to do, even as a really little kid. When you're not a sort of cool adolescent kid who's like, more social, whatever. You're just a little kid, and you're like, oh, I really want a bike, and having a bike is just, a kind of amazing. Being able to ride bikes, I ride bikes every single day in my life, and I'm very pleased that I have that connection, which started in BMX for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the goal, is that as we continue to get older and older, I mean, there have been times in my life where I've ridden my bike less, but I've never split ways with bikes. And you and I had a conversation about this, where the bikes they change size and they change shape a little bit and they change design, but long term, you're still out pedaling. You're still out on 2 wheels. You still have that outside exploring the world mentality, regardless of what the bike looks like. And sometimes that just starts with a 20-inch wheel or a 16-inch wheel.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same feeling no matter what, I think. And the bike is such an interesting piece of technology because, for all the technology that people try and sell you in the bike industry, it's really not a very technical thing. 2 wheels, a frame, a fork, a crank, and a seat, and a set of handlebars, right? So yeah, it's pretty basic.
So who were some of the pros that you grew up watching and being just astonished by their ability and wanting to be like?
The guys in the magazines for me, I mean, I guess there were 2 sort of groups. There was the British riders, and the British scene produced some phenomenally good freestyle bike riders, so BMX riders. So, you know, I'll name a few: Jeff Starenforth, Craig Campbell, Nick Phillip. You know, there were guys who were just incredibly good. Great vert riders in particular. Excuse me, in particular. So in the British scene, that was where we had more access to those guys. We got more magazines with them in it. On the American side of things, I vividly remember the GT World Tour coming through England, and that was Dave Breed and Eddie Fiola. And there was just something about that tour, the presentation of everything. Eddie, you know, well known for being kind of a showman, still obviously in that line of work now with his career. But there was just something really spectacular about it. You know, the bikes, the uniforms. So we saw that coming through. I remember that being quite a big deal for me and a lot of my friends too. But I mean, Ron Wilson and Brian Blyther and Dave Newry, they came through the UK a lot too. Ron Wilson, phenomenal inspiration. I'm very funny with Ron these days and kick myself a lot. But so yeah, those were the riders really, I think. I mean, I look back to riders like Bob Harrow too, because Bob was really kind of like one of the first freestyle riders that really made an impact in the UK. I think he was probably the first freestyle rider ever to tour in the UK for sure. And of course, you know, the brand was part of his deal as well. So we all got stuck, you know, hooked up on the brand. But Bob was definitely the sort of pathfinder for freestyle. So yeah, in those early eras, I guess 83 to 86-ish, those were the guys who were, you know, the inspiration to us, is that group of British guys and that group of American guys that we could see as well. So
That's neat. Yeah, I think sometimes those memories, those iconic memories of seeing different things, different events that we go to, different photos, and you know, talk to people, and they have that ingrained memory of where it was that really spurred on that love and that passion for the sport and such. So let's move into talking about your book, because you have created this book, and I can't remember. I think they sold out pretty quickly, if I remember correctly, because I think when I tried to get one, it wasn't that long after the release, and I wasn't able to get one. But you've created this book that Bob speaks very highly of, and you have spent a lot of your time, you've poured a lot of your heart into it. So will you give us a little bit of a rundown on what that looks like?
yeah, for sure. I mean, the deal with the lack of availability of the book actually is kind of an important factor, because, you know, typically with a book, I've done a few books over the years, and typically what happens is they're pretty time intensive, you know, not just the work in front of the computer, designing or copy editing or whatever, but obviously going out, getting the research, doing the interviews, doing the transcription. So I do pretty much everything in this particular book, from, you know, booking a flight if I go to see somebody, to, you know, doing the press check on the print right at the end. So what's tended to happen in the past is the initial vision for this book, for the BMX freestyle movement, was, let's get some of these origin stories on the record, because there was nothing in literature or in print, really. There was no sort of coffee table presence of this story. There is Joe Kidd and the Stingray, Mark Eaton's movie, which is a great documentary about BMX freestyle history. But I wanted to do something that was in my sort of wheelhouse. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this book. So what happens is you plan the book, you then have a ton of different options and decisions to make, which you don't even know you're going to get when you first start writing books, which are, how am I going to present the narrative, right? Is it going to come from me? Is it going to be written in the third person about the people? Is it going to be in their words? My experience of doing books in the bike industry had been, people like to read quotes. They don't want to hear someone like me taking the long way around explaining something to them. So it's a bit more compelling to sort of read quotes. And then I actually read a book. In fact, I read this book. What is it? This is a book I got for Christmas a few years ago, which is it's a book about Led Zeppelin. And I'm not necessarily a Zeppelin fan, but a friend of mine thought it would be something I'd be interested in. And it's the first book I ever read that was purely a series of conversational quotes. Okay, so the whole story is told in a timeline, beginning to end, and it's all basically people telling you the story that have been interviewed. So I was trying to figure out if I could do that. So I was looking around and thinking, how would I approach it? How many people would be in it? So you go through this process of all this planning, and then you get to the point of jumping off and doing it. And typically that planning is, maybe 6 months of your time, not 24 hours a day, but sort of like the curiosity of keeping coming back to it. But so, long story short, by the time you finish and produce a book, the resources to print it are usually dictated by how long it's taken. So you have X amount of budget to do it. A lot of the budget's been taken up in that year. So you're like, okay, I've got to write a check for the print. How many books can I squeeze out of what I've got left? And that's what I would do, is I print X amount. And actually, I was lucky too that I had this mechanism where people would pre-order the book as well, which there's a group of people around the world that thankfully trust me enough to do that. And that helps some of the seeding of the book. But yeah, ultimately you end up with an amount of books, and then you do a launch, and then they go, and then you keep getting emails saying, hey, can I get one? Can I get another one? And usually what happens then is I'm like, okay, am I going to reprint it or what? And then I usually think, well, maybe I'll just add to it, because there's always so much more to do with it. So that's what I've done. This is the third and final edition of it. First edition was a series of origin stories about things that I felt were, consequential, pivotal to the early history of BMX freestyle. So, the Horror team, BMX Action team, Freestyle magazine, etc. The second one I added to, and I sort of, kind of bolted out more. And then this third one is really bringing in some new chapters. So the third one is absolutely huge. It's like 552 pages, I think, this thing. So it's kind of like, 2 inches thick, I think. It's huge. So yeah, just getting to the point now of printing it. So it's got a bunch of new chapters in it. So people that bought the book before might be interested to buy the update, because it's got a bunch of, really sort of meaty new things in there. A chapter about the British scene, chapter about the beginning of BMX Action or Bicycle Motocross Action magazine, a chapter about the summer touring regime, guys going out on the road for 3 months, 16-year-old kids, and a guy who maybe 18 who was crewing the van. So these kind of unique stories of how BMX freestyle was kind of marketed in that pre-digital era. And a bunch of new contributors too. So there's maybe 150 people in this book, I think, at this point. And I think I inadvertently found out that there's 800 images in it when I checked the link file the other day. So it's really, really big, really deep, lots of good fun stories. The British chapter was one that was kind of close to my heart, obviously, as a kid growing up, and being around it, but not being in it, obviously, that scene, and then being able to research it with a bunch of cool people like, Nick, Phillip, Craig, Jess. And that chapter's actually become about 90 pages, so it's one of the bigger chapters in the book. And then in the sort of grander scheme of things, every single other chapter in the book has been expanded. So everything that was there initially, I've added to. So yeah, it's become this huge thing. I'm really pleased with it. It's taken a long time to get it finished on this one. I had a few challenges with my health that took me away from working on it. It's kind of when you've got, when you're in a project of that magnitude, you're kind of like, you have to work on it constantly. You have this kind of, it's almost like juggling, right? You start juggling with 2, and then you put 3 balls in the air, 4 or 5, and these are all this is the universe you create that informs the way things come together and how they interact and who you need. And if all those balls fall to the floor and you try to do like half a day a week working on it, it's just futile. You just can't get everything done. So I took a little bit of time out and came back to it, and really came back with this kind of renewed energy for it. And I think that was probably a really wise thing to do, because it's become so much bigger and more, deep and meaningful than I guess I originally thought it was going to be. So yeah, I'm really, really stoked on it, actually.
That's cool. It is amazing
those projects, and I think the majority of people have been in something similar at some point in their life, and it's easy to get really excited and then to lose a little bit of that drive and that energy and that excitement. And then, like you said, if you work on it a half day a week, and it's like, okay, well, this isn't going anywhere. I'm just done. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, being able to, or you see the end, but you're like, okay, but half day a week is it's gonna be 2 years before I get done.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's but being able to do what you did is really cool. And if I understand correctly, that launch is October 12th, correct?
Yeah. So theoretically, it is. I've got a couple of conversations going on right now about the venue. We've got a few logistical things because the book launch, what I'm trying to do with it, I've done launches before, and usually the way it works, again, sort of pointing back to that resource thing, is I find a venue, negotiate with a brewery or something, or a bike shop, and try to figure out how to get everybody together, have some resources there, maybe some refreshments, and then pull it off without having to write a big check at the end of it. And I've done that a couple of times. It's not easy, and it can be a little bit stressful to be the guy, trying to be the book guy and worrying about, if the bar bill is going to get covered. So in this case, we've got more resources. So, and I believe it needs to be a more interactive thing. So this time around, we're going to try to get some contributors to contribute on the weekend of the launch to do some things like roundtable forums. I've invited a lot of the photographers from the book to show stuff in their gallery. We're going to have a little museum of original bikes from riders. So not just, old school bikes, but, Brian Blyther's Harrow Sport that he rode in England, the original bike, Mark Luhmann's 988 Redline. So we'll have these kind of cool things. I think Ron Wilson's got some bikes still. So we'll have this kind of museum piece to it too. That's, the whole idea really is just to create something more of a celebration because, if nothing else, what the book has done is it's kind of connected everybody to the project. I'm always mindful that, a lot of guys, they do know each other, they do hang out together, they do chat to each other regularly, but there's so many people in this book now that a lot of those people don't see each other. So when I go and see Bob, for instance, I'm having a one-on-one with him, but all those other people barely ever see him. So I think it's really important that we get everyone together. I think it's cool for that community of contributors. I also think that's really cool for the fan base and the people that want to come along, because then we have this kind of rich mixture of all these people. And we've done that on a level before, and other people have done that on a level before, try to get everyone together. But this time around, I really feel like with the timing of everything, where we are in history, and this is really my last effort to do a book like this. There won't be a fourth edition. So I kind of feel like I'm highly motivated to say, how do we get everyone together? And because that ultimately has to be the reward for everyone is for the community to get together and reconnect and celebrate this remarkable story. So yeah. Anyway, sorry, as usual, a long answer to your question, but it's a work in progress. But it'll be epic, and Bob Osborne will be there. He's already printed actually 8 amazing photographs from his archive to display in the gallery there. Other photographers, well, there's a ton of other photographers. There's another 12 guys, I think, that are going to show stuff. So yeah, trying to get a big, cool venue together, trying to get all that finalized, and then get everyone together and and enjoy it. So yeah,
That's so cool. I'm looking forward to it. It was exciting to chat with Bob and for him to go. He said something along the lines of, "I would guess that you're going to be there." And I was like, all right, well, apparently I need to prioritize that. And it's exciting to hear about your desire to bring people together. And obviously the community, being unlike any other, is unique in that. And you can bring people back together and you can have conversations with people, and for people to get to catch up, and more BMX reunions have become more prominent and more accessible. But down in SoCal is, I mean, that's the birthplace of, and of where
Yeah.
so many of those people are from. That's where so much of that riding began anyway. And so you have the accessibility of people, and so you might as well turn it into something of a reunion.
Yeah, I mean, this story is a California origin story. There's no doubt about it. In BMX, BMX history really has to fight for attention more than a lot of different, nostalgic stories. Skateboarding does a great job. The skateboarding community does a great job of keeping its culture solid and elevating its story. The skateboard community and the skateboard industry is very, very self-contained as well, meaning, they don't have an outside industry producing their products. Usually a lot of those board makers and wheel makers and truck forgers, those guys are skateboarders, right? So where we've ended up in with BMX is, you have this kind of two pieces to the industry, which is you got the big bike companies that were super successful in the 80s and got purchased by bigger companies, and they've become different versions of that company now. A lot of them are a long way away from their origins. You've got that kind of cool core community of brands that are in the modern scene, and also brands like S&M, who, Chris Muller does a great job of having his kind of nostalgic mixture, but having a really relevant, modern bike company as well with S&M and Phipps. So yeah, BMX is have to fight for attention. The bike industry doesn't do a lot to support it. It's kind of, I say this a lot, and it's maybe a little bit unkind to say it, but it feels like BMX has become the lowest rung of the ladder in the bigger cycling industry, because most of those brands now are selling $10,000 mountain bikes and road bikes or whatever. So I think it's really important that we find ways to make this as big as possible, because we're not going to get big bike companies getting behind it to help us. Then we've got to do it ourselves. And I think there's plenty of ways to do it, and it's kind of the way it always has been. But again, it does speak to the fact that the BMX history of BMX is really underserved. There's not a lot of presence for it out there. So I am driven on by that a lot. That's not to say that I'm solving that problem single-handedly or think that I am, but I definitely want to contribute to having that change. And this will be the thing I'll point out from my point of view and say, okay, that's my effort, that's the best I can do. I think it's going to be pretty big and people are going to enjoy it. So yeah, whether we take it any further than that, there's been some interest in turning it into something of a sort of mini documentary series, which we may pursue some options with that. But I've tended to sort of hold that off because I don't want to get too caught up in a million things and not finish one thing. So yeah, that might happen too. But again, maybe I'm on a bit of a crusade in this comment here, but it's just trying to get the story elevated, trying to get the story recognized for its kind of inspirational values, and trying to get the people recognized that move the needle, like Bob Harrow, Bob Osborne, all those guys in there that we know about that did something that made it bigger than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is great. I think that you'll have just continued support for the project. It's been neat to hear about some of the stories of the people that have jumped on board with you and been able to contribute to the book, and just the way that you have gone through is that Bob spoke to this as well, as the way that you detailed it out in the book that you mentioned earlier. What was it? Trampled Underfoot. Yeah. But just being told in the way of quotes. And so not chapters that are broken down by people, but chapters that are broken down by subject and people's quotes throughout them. And Bob spent a lot of time talking about the amount of time that it takes to articulate that story in the manner that you did. And it creates so much value to that, and so much insight that people, may spur on memories. It may bring insight. I think one thing that's super fun about it too is that, so my kids race, they ride skate parks, they mountain bike. I do all the same. My dad still rides with us, but it was him that got me into riding, and it was myself and him that got my kids into riding. And for someone like him to be able to share stories with his grandkids of going through this book that you've created and say, oh man, I remember when this happened. Or for me, either with my kids or my grandkids, being able to go through and say, I remember having this conversation, or I remember seeing this photo in a magazine. And there's so much value to that, because in some ways what you're doing is creating a scrapbook. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And it's a scrapbook through the history of the sport. And my grandma made a lot of effort to make scrapbooks for with my brother and I. And so to be able to go through that, but my brother he was talking about it, I don't know, a year ago or so. And he goes, kids just won't have that now. Kids won't go to their grandparents. Yeah. It'll be like, hey, I've got this old phone in the drawer. Do you want to look through it? Like,
yeah, there'll be an app for it, right?
Exactly. So the value of what you're doing to capture and recreate some of those memories, and I don't know that everybody even has the words to articulate the value to a project like you've worked to create. Because in some ways it's like, oh, it's cool. But I don't really know all that it has to offer, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's really just an effort to make it authentic and compelling, right? And what's more compelling than hearing Ron Wilkerson tell you about going on what's like to be on tour for Harrow for a day, right? I mean, I could try to tell you, but it's not anywhere near as powerful coming from me. So it was a decision I made a long time ago to do. I've written books in the documentary style as well. I've done books for other bike companies where it's kind of me telling the story, which is fine. You know, it's kind of, they're interesting projects to do and they're fun, but the challenge of this one is very different. It's funny because I remember thinking at one point, oh, this would be easier, right? It'd be easier just to string it together. And then I found myself one day, what I do is it's a really kind of almost analog process. Is I transcribe the interviews, and often that, I think in this case it might be as many as 1 million words I've transcribed on this book. They're not all in it, but I've had to transcribe those interviews, right? So it's a phenomenal amount of work, and I don't tend to rely upon too much technology to do that. I just don't, because for me I have this responsibility to keep the authentic voice of the person. So I don't want anything in there to other than me to make those decisions. So there's a lot of transcription, and then what I do is I literally break everything up into paragraphs, and then I print them in Word, Microsoft Word, and often it's about that thick. And then I have a pair of scissors, and I take over a large unused room in my house, and I put boards around the edge of the room. And I literally cut every single paragraph up, and with a pen, I pin them together, right? And then I get to say, okay, well, in this particular chapter, I've got 7 guys, I separate them up. I probably go into the weeds on the same subject. So I'm looking for them talking about the same things. And that's how you start to sort of weave that story that moves forward together with spoken word narrative, right? Which is what it is. So yeah, it's kind of a different challenge altogether. And, you know, again, but not burdened, but certainly I take the responsibility of trying to create a sort of authentically written document, meaning, you know, I don't want the grammar to be bad or typos, but containing the personality of the person who's telling me what they're telling me is important too. So yeah, it's kind of really interesting. It's a bit of a puzzle, you know, literally a puzzle at that point of how do these pieces fit together. And often, you know, there'll be literally hundreds and hundreds of scraps of paper on my wall, and I'll be reading them. And then literally what I do at the end is, when I've got them in order, is I take a roll of tape and I go down the wall with a roll of tape and I unpin them all. And then I literally notes from my desk, and I thread it all together. So it's a super, it's not a magical process at all. It's not very slick or anything like that, but it really does tend to contain the juice of what I'm trying to hold in this thing, right? So yeah, different challenge altogether, but fun to get to the end of it.
The amount of effort that you go through to maintain that voice, and you spoke to that. You don't want the voice or the heart to change from the quote, and you've spent this time in front of this person recording their interview. You've listened to their voice. You've gotten to know this person, whether you knew them from the magazine or you're just getting to know them a little bit more from having the conversation then. But to key in on the amount of effort that you go through is phenomenal. Dom, I want to commend you for your work on this, because your task, your process sounds incredibly overwhelming. Just from the standpoint of going in to create a 500-page book, and obviously it's gotten longer over the years. It has taken different shapes and things that probably wasn't what you went into it imagining it would be. But so the whole project, the end of the project makes it sound really overwhelming. I mean, I could take on something like that if I really wanted to, but like, that task is daunting, and you have made so much effort to make sure that these things are in order, and that the heart and the soul and the passion for the sport and for that quote. And anyway, it is just phenomenal to hear you talk about that, and to hear you tell that story it gave me all the more respect for who you are and what it is that you're doing for the sport as a whole.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I mean, it's the effort, it's my own passion and commitment for it, and this is my role in the community. Is I decided I'm going to do this work, and I don't need to claim anything else. I don't even really need to be out in front of my projects. I don't do a lot of this kind of thing. I tend to just do the work and show up at the book launch. And it's not because I'm like overly modest or anything like that. It's because the story is authentic when it's about the people and it's about the story. So I'm, without trying to sound like I'm being falsely modest or anything, because I'm not. I love it when people come up to me and say, "Hey, your book's great," or whatever. Equally, I try to keep the focus on the book and just be the kind of enabler. And I just bring my vision to it and my way of doing it, which I'm sure there's people out there that could find a more slick way of doing it. But what I end up with, I'm usually very happy with. And I think it represents the people well, because I have that responsibility to them. And it ends up being, this tangible thing that we can all look at and enjoy. And, this whole scene is about nostalgia, right? I mean, that's the BMX nostalgia market. People in my book, I'm sure a lot of the guys there would not feel the same way. But when I put the book together originally, I didn't write it for the people in that book. And sometimes the process of writing it or researching it or whatever, doing the interviews, the feeling of being with contributors is it's for them, right? It's like, hey, everyone, we're all engaged in each other, getting the stories. I'll get calls from guys 10 o'clock in the evening, out randomly, a contributor saying, "Hey, listen, I just remembered a story that I think you might want for your book." Great, let's do it. I'll record. So, but ultimately, to be honest with you, the book serves people like me, which is people who weren't there, right? I'm enjoying hearing the stories as much as I hope people will enjoy reading them. So it's, again, I'm not trying to sort of make myself sound like I'm doing anything exceptional, but I enjoy doing it. I do think it's worth doing it. I'm passionate about the story, passionate about doing it well, making it authentic, and getting it in the front of people. So when I've done that, I'll feel really good and give myself some congratulations, I'm sure.
I love that. Well, I am eager to get my hands on a copy of this latest iteration of it and to be able to go through it and see the work that you've done. But again, thank you for that effort made and for the desire to maintain the integrity of the stories and the interviewees. Is really cool. So
Thank
I
you.
I was curious because I forgot to ask earlier, but you had mentioned you had pestered your mom for a while and you got her to go to the bike shop and get you a bike. What bike was it?
Yeah. um, it was called a Black Lion, and it took me a long time in life to figure out why it was called a Black Lion. And I remember seeing a picture of it. My mom has some old pictures of me riding it, and I'm thinking, okay, that's the Peugeot logo, the French car, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, okay, they must have been made by Peugeot then. So it was a French, yeah, French BMX. I mean, it was 1980, so pad in there that England gets everything later than the States. So probably in real time in the States, it was a bike from 1978.
Okay.
So it wasn't fancy. And my mum, like I said, we couldn't afford it, but it didn't matter. And now I had that bike for a long time. That bike changed colors several times. Every single component was changed on that bike. I had many a stressful day being in my garage with taking that thing apart and trying to figure out how to put it back together so it would function properly again. So it was really a bike that, kind of, I got my money's worth out of it that way. And then my mum did buy me a really cool bike actually later on. But yeah, I was really attached to that thing, and it didn't need to be anything other than what it was, but it was certainly something that it was a life-changing thing to get that bike, I guess, is my what I would say. And I'm sure it's like that for a lot of people
Yeah.
in BMX, and probably that's what led me into the hobby of collecting them too. I think is it's like, oh, I'm gonna get that bike now. I'm 35 years old, but yeah, I think I can go get that Horror Master now that I wanted. And there was this whole scene, as I said to you before, that was kind of active and bubbling up under the bike companies. But
At this moment, I'm going to interrupt our episode, our current interview, briefly to give a special shout out and thank you to our sponsors that have backed us financially in this project, in our mission, and give them a huge thank you. So at our gold level, we have Luminex Neon and Marketing Breakthrough. At our silver level, we have Sound Cedar Lumber and Bicycle Thieves. And at our bronze level, we have Pro Start Gates and Justin Shepard, Title Examiner. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for backing us. If you are looking for help with any project that you're working on, if you're looking for some cool things to do, go ahead and check out the links to their websites in our description and go ahead and visit them, show them some love. We are so appreciative for their support. And if you are interested in getting involved in a local track, helping out, or sponsoring a local track, sponsoring the BMX Breakthrough Project as a whole, please reach out at j@bmxbreakthrough.com. You can also go to our website and find out some of the needs of tracks and some of the things that we are working on at bmxbreakthrough.com. Once again, thank you so much for your support. Let's dive back into this conversation.
So yeah, it's kind of that's my sort of personal story with it. Is that it's nothing crazy. It is a very personal story to me because it's part of my childhood and growing up and having these cool, fun distractions and being very grateful now looking back that that was the time I grew up in. As I know that you're very active in trying to draw attention to BMX now and trying to get more participation in it, which I think is another massive task and a very honorable one, by the way, you do. And of course, there's so many distractions now that we didn't have as kids, right? BMX was one of a few things we could do. Now there's very many things kids can do, and so that's a tough deal. But getting kids to ride bikes, I guess I stand there as testament to if you start riding a bike when you're 8 years old or whatever it was. I had a bike before that. Then you're probably still going to be riding it, 40 years later. So, and it's a pretty cool thing because that's the case for a lot of people, I think, that were into BMX in those early years.
Yeah. Absolutely. I say this in a lot of episodes, but my goal is that my kids would love riding their bike in 20, 30 years. And regardless of if they're racing BMX or if they're riding at skate park, ultimately, I just want them to enjoy being on their bike and to be able to, if they have kids, take them out on their bikes and to be able to enjoy that together because, like you said, there are a lot of other distractions and a bike just it kind of is its own journey. It makes its own fun. So
Mhm.
enjoy
Pretty,
that.
pretty, pretty simple thing. I think one of the quotes I remember watching in a documentary once was man's noblest invention, right? The bicycle was man's noblest invention. It probably is. I mean, it's just, so has the bicycles have the ability to bring everybody's together like they did back in the day. It was another great aspect of it when we were kids was if you had a bike, that was the currency to get friends because other kids did not look at you and say, I don't know if I like this kid. It's like, no, he rides BMX, so he's fine. So,
Yeah.
and Ron Wilson says that in the book too. Ron Wilson says something like, again, paraphrasing, if you had a BMX bike in the 80s and you saw another BMX kid on a BMX bike, you were instantly accepted. And that is exactly one of the most profound quotes in the book, I think.
My kids and I were mountain biking, and across the parking lot, I saw this dad and his like 8-year-old daughter riding around the park on, oh, I can't remember. He had an old, maybe it was a Schwinn Predator or something. And then his daughter was on an old, maybe it was an old red line, like an old MX2 or
Wow.
something like that. Anyway, they were old enough that they caught my eye. And so I went over and immediately we started having a conversation because I just said, you don't see a lot of those bikes. And then he proceeds to tell me the stories of how one of them was his and one of them was I think a friend's and that friend's mom was just gonna throw it in the trash, and so he got it, and like it's fun because you instantly have that connection and seeing somebody on a BMX bike, especially when you're, in your 30s, 40s, 50s, it starts to become less and less common. So there's an
Yeah.
instant connection too to just, hey, you have small wheels too. What's your story?
It's funny, isn't it? I could be driving down the road and I can see a BMX up ahead, 300 yards away. And I can tell from 300 yards away, just from the geometry or something, I can tell if that's an old school bike. I saw a kid the other day, a kid riding around an old school bike, and I was like rubbernecking, and my wife's like, "What's not on it?" But there is a really profound. Yeah, I don't even. I'm constantly surprised by it, and kind of overwhelmed by it at times. But all of the stuff I've done over the years, all of the work I've done in what is this kind of nostalgia scene for BMX, which is, all of my work is in the past, is dealing with stuff in the past, right? So making bikes from the past, writing books, telling stories. I get messages from a very broad cross section of people in my age group now who rode when I rode, who are doing a very broad set of different things in their life, right? It's people who are the managing directors of global companies to, guys who are working in a machine shop or whatever. The commonality of how much passion and love those people still have for it and how impulsively they're caught up in it when they get reintroduced to it is the same, right? And you look around the landscape. I mean, a lot of the people in the book as well. One of the things we're going to do at the book launch is we're going to have a little gathering of the Wizard Reunion staff, right? I think I'm going to call it the Wizard Reunion because there's so many good people in the book from Bob's early years, some of his first employees and designers and stuff. And such a positive story, that chapter. But so many of those people went on to do remarkable creative things, right? And it's not just people who were at Wizard. There are other guys who are writers who went on to do crazy things. Craig Campbell became a global DJ. Mick Phillip Anarchic Adjustment, had his brand, went on to become a really, really successful creative guy. Spike Jones is another guy who's in the book. He, of course, needs no explanation. And there's lots and lots of examples of it, of people who had their first moment in BMX, often had their first moment working under the tutelage of Bob Osborne, right? Went on to crazy things. Mark Luman has a very successful design agency. So embedded this kind of creative mindset in people, or it unlocked a creative mindset in people, I think. And that's where it's another sort of profound element to it. I get messages from people who have remarkable stories. People buy bikes from me who, the Redline RO22, famed Redline RO22, the most stolen bike ever. I get more emails from people saying to me, God, I really want to get another one because it was stolen outside of the shop. It's like, that's the Redline RO22 story. Everyone had theirs stolen. So I don't know, there's, not going off into the weeds too much, but there's a really strong reconnection nostalgically to BMX from this particular era. And the books really try to exist to be that for people. The guy who doesn't want to come in and spend $4,000 on a vintage bike, or doesn't want to start riding in skate parks again, he can get a book, and actually he can have an experience with the book that isn't, that is authentic, but isn't, going to see him with his arm in a sling next week at skate park. So
Yeah.
it's kind of fun. It's fun stuff to do, and it constantly blows my mind, the emails I get from people with stories all the time about their connection to it, and how so much passion comes through even on the email.
Yeah, that's really cool. I just love what you're doing. I am so excited about the release. I'm excited to again get my hands on one of the copies of it and be able to look through and just kind of reminisce with some of the stories that are between the pages, and being able to look back at some of the early era stuff of freestyle BMX, and learn a little bit more about even how things started. I have, I've heard stories and I've got some familiarity with it, but to be able to learn and to be able to do a deeper dive into something that is curated and designed by you, and a little bit more documented, it's so valuable to something that you enjoy.
I think it's my best effort, and it is better than anything I've done. So that's
cool.
That's my pledge, I guess.
Awesome. Well, where can we find information about what you're doing? You said right now you're working on venues and you're working on official dates. And so for people to stay up to date on that, what is the best way for people to connect with you or find that?
So the best thing to do right now is I haven't been doing a lot of outreach with my channels because I've been so busy, and because I wanted to sort of get everything wrapped up so that I can answer questions, without saying, hey, I think it's going to be this. We're now at that point. So I'll be communicating through my website, which is freestylehistory.com. So w2wfreestylehistory.com. I do stuff on my social media. Up until quite recently, it's been, me just sharing some of the outtakes and stuff, but I'll be starting to sort of scope out what happens with the launches. We're going to do one in the States, going to do one in England, because that British chapter is a big deep dive, and the guys will love that, I think. Getting it all lined up. Bob Osborne wants to be at those book launches. He's definitely going to be in LA. I think he's still waiting on me to tell him a bit more about the English one, but he'll be there, I think. So yeah, we'll be able to get people together and have fun and celebrate the story. So yeah, that's the most important thing.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll definitely include the link for that, and people can get a hold of your, hop onto the website to stay updated on that. And what is your social media? What's the best way to find you?
So again, similar handle. I think it's, I think it's the birth of the freestyle movement is the handle.
Okay.
I'll check. I better check.
That's
on
okay.
That, because I might have introduced the word BMX
here while we're chatting. I'll do a quick search.
Okay.
You said the birth of the freestyle movement.
Yeah, that's my Instagram handle.
There it is on Instagram. The birth of the freestyle movement.
Fantastic.
Awesome. And then the website, w2wfreestylehistory.com.
That's correct.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
Dom, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your investment into the sport. Thank you for, being willing to have this conversation. And I'm just excited for what's being created.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've got a lot to say about it. I don't need much of an invitation right now to talk about it. It's getting to the point where it's big and fun and relieving for me too, to not have to feel like I'm working it every day. But I'm really pleased with it. I'm very grateful that you're interested in chatting about it. So thanks for letting me wax lyrical about the birth of the freestyle movement. It'll be a fun end to the year. I think if we can get people together and do some things that kind of that we can all get excited about, fans, contributors, and me trying to get the book out there. So yeah, I appreciate the chat.
Right on. Well, we'll stay in the loop. We'll try to figure out or find out when it is that you're doing your launch, and I'll just plan to see you there in person.
Awesome.
Right on.
Thank you, Jay.
Take care, Dom.
You too.
Thank you for joining us in today's episode. It is because of people like you and our sponsors who make this whole thing possible, because they have a desire to see the sport grow. If you would like to get involved in the mission of BMX Breakthrough, you can start by going to your local track, find a way to volunteer, help out, and serve there. Or you can go to our website, bmxbreakthrough.com, in order to donate, find out about sponsorship, or learn more.